Christmas at Judith's house always looked perfect from the outside. The snow on the front lawn was untouched, glittering under the string lights she'd wrapped around every gutter and railing. The big bay window in the dining room glowed warm and golden, silhouettes moving around a table that sagged under the weight of food. If you drove by, you'd probably think, "What a lovely family Christmas." You wouldn't see the way my stomach twisted as I carried in the last casserole. By the time we finally sat down, my feet ached from hours of chopping and stirring and basting. I'd made the roasted vegetables, the stuffing, 2 pies, and the rolls that were now sitting neatly in a basket in the center of the table. Judith's turkey, of course, occupied pride of place on a platter, surrounded by holly sprigs like it was starring in a magazine spread. I was at the far end of the table, as usual. Close enough to serve, far enough that Judith didn't have to look at me unless she wanted to. "Everyone, dig in," she trilled, smoothing her red satin blouse as if she'd just single-handedly produced the feast. "I've outdone myself this year, if I do say so." Outdone herself? My hands tightened around my napkin. Around me? Tyler's relatives started passing platters and making appreciative noises. His sister cooed over the turkey. His uncle reached for the stuffing. "This is so good, Mom," Tyler said, loading his plate. "You've still got it." Judith beamed. "Well, someone has to take care of this family," she said. Her eyes flicked down the table to me, then away, the implication hanging there. I forced a smile and took a small scoop of potatoes. The first blow landed over gravy. "Addison, pass the gravy boat, will you?" Judith called down the table without looking at me. I reached for it carefully. It was heavy and hot. By the time it got to her, the top had slid just enough for a skin to form on the surface. She peered in. "Oh dear, it's gone cold." "I can warm it up," I offered quickly. "I think it cooled while we were." That's what happens when some people dawdle, instead of bringing dishes out on time. She said loudly, "Cold gravy, cold rolls, cold everything." Useless. The word hit me like a slap. Conversation around the table stuttered, then resumed at a forced, too bright volume. A couple of cousins suddenly found the cranberry sauce fascinating. Across from me, Tyler's sister smirked into her wineglass. Under the table, Tyler's hand found my knee and squeezed. From anyone else, it might have been comfort. From him, I knew exactly what it meant. Don't start. I swallowed hard. The room felt too warm, my cheeks burned. "That was hurtful," I said quietly, hoping my voice didn't shake. "I spent all day helping cook Judith." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "Oh, for heaven's sake. It's a joke, Addison. If you can't handle a little teasing, maybe you shouldn't be here." "I'm not teasing," I replied, a bit louder this time. "Calling me useless isn't a joke." Her gaze snapped fully onto me then, eyes narrowing. The room quieted. People pretending not to listen while very obviously listening. "There she goes," Judith said, gesturing vaguely in my direction with the serving spoon. "Always so dramatic. You know, Tyler, when I was your age, women knew how to host without turning it into a therapy session at the table. Some people are just not cut out for this." Her eyes flicked to my empty ring finger, where a child might have been imagined. I caught the look. A few people tittered nervously. My heart pounded in my ears. I turned to Tyler. "Are you really okay with her talking to me like that?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. "In front of everyone." He stared at his plate for a beat too long. Then he sighed, the way you sigh when your dog has tracked mud into the house again. "Addison, please," he muttered. "It's Christmas. Don't make a scene." A scene. My voice cracked on the word. "She just called me useless." "Because you're taking everything so personally," Judith cut in. "You still haven't given this family a grandchild. You barely come by, and when you do, you act like a guest. Maybe if you knew how to pitch in without complaining." "I cooked half this meal," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Every side dish on this table. And yet here we are with cold gravy." She snapped. "Honestly, what do you even bring to this family?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Something in my chest twisted so hard it hurt. I looked at Tyler again, begging him silently, say something. Just once, pick me. He put his fork down with a clink and finally met my eyes. She's my mother, Addison, he said, voice tight. She's always been like this. If you can't handle it, that's on you. If you don't like it, you can leave. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Leave. He hadn't raised his voice, but the words rolled down the table, turning heads. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone's fork paused halfway to their mouth. The only sound was the faint hum of Christmas music from the kitchen radio. The man I'd married. The one I'd defended 100 times with. He's just caught in the middle. Had just chosen his mother over me in front of his entire family. And then invited me to walk out of his life. Shock hit first, cold and sharp. Then beneath it, a wave of heartbreak so deep it felt like the ground had opened under my chair. And then beneath that, something else. Something quiet and solid and unfamiliar, a line hardening in the sand. The room went silent, everyone pretending they weren't listening. My husband had just chosen his mother over me in front of his entire family. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my napkin. I just pushed back my chair and stood up. Because if he wanted me to leave, I was about to show him what that really looked like. It's funny how, looking back, all the red flags were there. At the time, they just looked like quirks you explain away with words like devoted and family-oriented. Tyler and I met in the most unromantic place possible, the accounting department of a mid-size manufacturing company. We were both buried in spreadsheets at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday when he leaned over the cubicle wall and said, "If I stare at this variance report any longer, my eyes are going to fall out." Coffee. He was charming in a way that felt safe. Not the loud, center of the room type, but the guy who made dry jokes about amortization schedules and remembered how I took my lat. We bonded over late nights and shared deadlines, over being the reliable ones who stayed until the numbers balanced. When he finally asked me out, it was to a quiet wine bar instead of a noisy club. On our third date, he walked me to my car and said, "I really like how steady you are, Addison. You make everything feel less chaotic." I liked that. I liked being the ballast. The first time I noticed how close he was to his mother was on that same date, when his phone buzzed for the third time in an hour. "Sorry," he said, silencing it again. "That's my mom. She worries if I'm out late." At 30, I teased. He grinned. "She's just very involved. Mom knows best, she always says. Daily calls, I learned, sometimes more." At first, I thought it was sweet. I grew up with a mother who loved me but also believed in healthy distance. The idea of a man who adored his mom seemed promising. Like he'd know how to treat women well. I met Judith 2 months later. At a Sunday lunch, she insisted we attend. She opened the door of her immaculate suburban house in pearls and perfume, looking me up and down in one quick, assessing sweep. "So you're Addison," she said, lips curving in something that wasn't quite a smile. "My son usually dates petite girls." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Nice to meet you too." Inside, the table was already set, not a fork out of place. She waved me toward a chair but didn't sit until Tyler did. "I hope you can cook," she said halfway through the meal, as if it had just occurred to her. Tyler loves a home-cooked meal. I always say, the quickest way to lose a man is takeout. "I can manage more than takeout," I said lightly. "I make a mean lasagna." "We'll see," she replied. I told myself she was just old-fashioned, that she'd come around once she saw how much I cared about her son. For a while, the rough edges seemed manageable. I threw myself into being what I thought a good wife should be. Even before I had the title, bringing homemade desserts to family gatherings, asking Judith for her recipes, showing genuine interest in her stories. At home, I worked full-time, did most of the grocery shopping, and still somehow became the default planner for holidays and birthdays. The pattern emerged slowly, like discoloration spreading on a wall you're trying not to look at. Judith would taste something I'd cooked and say, "Not bad." A little salty, but not bad for someone who didn't grow up in a real kitchen. She'd glance at my work blazer and sniff. "You know, some women don't feel the need to dress like men to have a career." When she found out what I did, she laughed. An accountant. Well, at least someone is handling numbers. Tyler's the real earner, of course. She had keys to our apartment for emergencies. I'd come home to find her rearranging my spice rack, moving my pans, throwing out my cheap olive oil and replacing it with her preferred brand. Once I caught her in our bedroom, holding one of my dresses between two fingers like it was something that had crawled in from the garden. "And when are you two going to give us a baby?" she'd ask, tapping her watch. Tick-tock. I'm not getting any younger, you know. Every time I brought it up to Tyler, expecting at least a flicker of discomfort, he'd sigh. "That's just how she is, Addie," he'd say, using the nickname that normally softened me. "She doesn't mean anything by it. Don't be so sensitive." If I pointed out specifics, he'd roll his eyes. "So what if she moved your pots?" "She cleaned the kitchen, didn't she? She's trying to help." Keeping the peace became my full-time unpaid job. I learned which comments to let slide, which gatherings to mentally armor up for, which topics to avoid altogether. Every swallowed retort felt like a small stone in my stomach. Over 5 years, the pile grew heavy. The cracks started to show a few months before that Christmas. Tyler's company had a networking mixer, spouses invited. I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. Judith came along to support her son. At one point, I heard her telling his boss, "Addison's good with numbers, but she'd forget her head if it wasn't attached. I don't know how she'd survive without my Tyler." Everyone laughed, Tyler included. In the car on the way home, I said, "That was humiliating. Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged. She was joking. "You're reading too much into it." I watched the streetlights flash across his face and felt something sour rise in my throat. I kept telling myself things would get better once Judith got used to me. What I didn't realize was that she never planned to. And that Christmas was just the moment she finally said out loud what she'd been thinking all along. December is always brutal in accounting. By the second week, my days had blurred into a haze of year-end reports, budget meetings, and last-minute crises from managers who suddenly realized they'd overspent. I was leaving the office long after dark, my eyes gritty from staring at spreadsheets, my brain fried. So when Judith announced at Thanksgiving that she would be hosting Christmas as usual, but expected me to help more this year, part of me wanted to say no on the spot. "It means a lot to Tyler," she said, resting a possessive hand on his arm. "Christmas is a family holiday. We do things properly in this house." I caught Tyler's glance then, the quick, pleading look he got whenever his mother made a decree. "What can do it?" he said later in the car. "You're great with this stuff. And it's just one day. It will make her happy. One day." As if the emotional hangover didn't last for weeks. In the days leading up to Christmas, the microaggressions started stacking up like kindling. Judith created a group text with the family. Tyler, his sister, a couple of cousins, me tacked on at the end. The first message popped up on my phone during a lunch break. "Can't wait for our familial Christmas dinner this year." A second bubble appeared a moment later. And Addison too, of course. I stared at the screen, though of course, hitting harder than it had any right to, as if I were an optional add-in to the real unit. Tyler's reply came quickly, "It'll be great, Mom." When I showed him the messages that night and said, "Do you see how that sounds?" he shrugged. "She didn't mean it like that," he said. "You know how she types. Emojis and dramatics. Please don't start, Addie. It's just Christmas." Then there was the call 2 days before. "Now, I'll handle the turkey, obviously," Judith said as soon as I answered, "No hello. But you can do the sides. All of them. And dessert." "That's a lot, Judith," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm slammed at work this week." "Well, you don't have children to look after," she replied, as if that settled it. "You can manage some vegetables and a pie." "Honestly, dear, it's the least you can do." I bit back the urge to say, "You don't have small children either." Instead I said, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my to-do list for work, feeling the weight of yet another unpaid, unacknowledged job being dropped on top. A small, rebellious voice whispered, "You don't have to go." You could say no. But then another voice, the one trained by 5 years of "Don't rock the boat," answered back, "If you back out now, you'll be the difficult wife who ruined Christmas. Tyler will be stuck in the middle. It's easier to just go." So I told myself the same lie I always did. Just get through the night. Smile only a few hours. On Christmas Eve, I set my alarm for 6. While the rest of the city slept in, I was peeling potatoes, chopping carrots, assembling casseroles. By 10, the oven was working overtime. By noon, I'd run out to pick up an expensive chocolate torte from the bakery Judith liked. $40 I shouldn't have spent, but justified as keeping the peace. On the way home, I stopped at the mall for one last thing. A spa voucher Judith had once mentioned wanting but would never splurge on for herself. I told myself that if I could just find the perfect gift, maybe she'd finally see I was trying. When we arrived at her house that evening, arms full of dishes and bags, Judith took the spy envelope without really looking at me. "Oh, you shouldn't have," she said, already turning away. "Put the food in the kitchen." And Addison, her eyes swept over my simple green dress. "You couldn't find something a bit more festive? It's Christmas, not a staff meeting." Tyler's hand brushed my elbow. A tiny, useless apology I'd seen 100 times before. Upstairs in the guest bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror as I fixed my lipstick. I looked tired, older than 32. There was a tightness around my mouth I didn't recognize. "This is the last time," I whispered to myself. The last time I let her ruin a holiday. I didn't know, then, how true that promise would turn out to be. If I'd listened to the knot in my stomach, I would have stayed home. Instead, I walked into that house carrying casseroles and gifts, having no idea I was walking into the night that would end my marriage. If you've never been in a room where everyone is pretending not to hear you being humiliated, count yourself lucky. By the time Judith called me useless over the gravy, we were already midway through the slow motion car crash that was Christmas dinner. The table looked like something out of a catalog. Her best china, crystal glasses, little place cards with everyone's names in looping gold ink, holly and candles down the center. The smell of turkey and cinnamon and roasted garlic hung in the air. "You've really outdone yourself, Mom," Tyler said again as he passed the platter. "It looks amazing." Judith patted his hand. "Well, you know me," she said. "I just can't help myself. I've been doing this since before some people at this table were even born." I watched her slide a dish of sweet potatoes toward his uncle. "These are excellent, Judith," he said after taking a bite. "You've still got the magic touch." "Oh, thank you," she replied, preening. "That's my recipe, of course. Been making it for Tyler since he was a little boy. Isn't that right, sweetheart?" I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone light, "I made the sweet potatoes this year. I used your recipe, though." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the clink of a fork against a plate. Judith's eyes flicked to me, sharp as a knife. "We know you're desperate to be useful, dear," she said, voice carrying easily down the table. "But some of us were born knowing how to run a household." A cousin snorted, trying to turn it into a laugh. A couple of people chuckled weakly. Most suddenly found their plates fascinating. The words landed anyway. Desperate, useless, I swallowed hard. My napkin crumpled under my fingers. "That was uncalled for, Judith," I said quietly. My voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be, but it was louder than the first time I'd tried to stand up for myself in this house. "I spent all day cooking." She rolled her eyes, as if I'd confirmed every stereotype she held about me. "There she goes again," she said, appealing to the room, playing the victim. "You can't say anything around her without her throwing a fit. Useless in the kitchen, useless in giving us a grandchild, but very useful at causing drama." The word grandchild pinged around my skull like shrapnel. Judith had never been subtle about what she thought my womb owed her. She'd made comments at every holiday, every birthday party, every random Tuesday we'd run into her at the grocery store. Tick-tock, Addison. If you spent less time at that job, maybe you'd have a baby by now. Tyler deserves to be a father. Now she'd rolled all of those digs into one neat little dagger and plunged it in front of everyone. Something in me cracked. I turned to Tyler. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a hand on my arm. A sharp, "Mom." That's enough. Any sign that he saw me as something more than the woman at the bottom of his mother's pecking order. Instead, he leaned in, jaw tight. "Can you stop making everything about you?" He hissed under his breath. "It's Christmas. I'm not making anything." I started. He cut me off louder now. "You always do this. You turn every little comment into a big thing." She was joking. I stared at him. She just called me useless. Twice. And brought up kids again in front of everyone. How is that a joke? He set his fork down with a little more force than necessary and finally met my eyes, annoyance clear. "She's my mother," he said. "She's always been like this. If you don't like it, you know where the door is." The room went oddly quiet, the kind of silence that hums. Aunt Linda's hand froze halfway between the mashed potatoes and her plate. Tyler's sister looked back and forth between us, mouth slightly open. Someone cleared their throat. No one said a word. Shock washed over me in a cold wave. For a split second, I thought I might be sick right there on the white tablecloth. He'd said it out loud. What he'd been implying for years. If you don't like it, leave. It wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment mistake. It was the truth of our marriage, boiled down to one sentence in front of his entire family. His mother was non-negotiable. I was optional. A strange calm settled over me, cutting through the hurt like frost. I laid my napkin carefully next to my plate and stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood, loud in the quiet dining room. "Where are you going?" Judith demanded, voice sharp with incredulity and a hint of triumph. "We haven't even had dessert." "I don't want to ruin your holiday any more than I already have," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too even. "So I'm going to make us all happy and take that door you offered me." "Addison, sit down," someone muttered. "Don't be so sensitive," came from another corner of the table. Several pairs of eyes refused to meet mine. I looked at Tyler one more time. He stared back, arms crossed, not moving, not reaching for me. He wasn't going to stop me. He wasn't going to follow me. "Enjoy your family dinner," I said. "All of you." I walked out of the dining room. My legs shaking so badly I was amazed I didn't trip. In the hallway, the sounds of cutlery and forced conversation started up again almost immediately, as if the space I'd just left had already been filled in. Outside, the cold hit me like a slap. I fumbled with my keys, hands numb, and slid into the driver's seat. The porch lights cast long shadows across the snow. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, heart racing. The temptation to go back in and smooth things over, to apologize for overreacting, to pretend it hadn't been that bad, years of conditioning, rose up like a tide. Then I pictured my place at that table, Judith's smirk, Tyler's crossed arms, useless in the kitchen, useless in giving us a grandchild. Something in me refused to step back into that house. I started the car. As I pulled away from the curb, the Christmas lights blurred through my tears. I cried all the way to my mom's house. But somewhere between their driveway and hers, something shifted. For 5 years, I'd been terrified of being the woman who walked out. That night, I realized the only thing scarier was staying. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the ache of having cried myself empty. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was wrong, lower, textured, with the faint shadow of the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there when I was 16. The blanket over me was my mom's old knitted one, scratchy but warm. Then it all came back, the table. The word useless. Tyler's face as he told me I could leave. The way my hands had shaken on the steering wheel all the way across town. My eyes felt swollen and grainy. I pushed myself up on the couch, the springs creaking, and saw my mother sitting in the armchair opposite, hands wrapped around a mug, watching me with a softness that almost undid me completely. "Hey, baby," she said. "I didn't want to wake you. What time is it?" My voice sounded like sandpaper. "Almost 10. She glanced at the curtains. You got here at, what, 9:30? You were hysterical. I figured you needed sleep more than anything. Memories flickered. Me stumbling through her front door, gasping out half-coherent details between sobs, her wordlessly taking my coat, guiding me to the couch, tucking the blanket around me the way she had when I was a kid with the flu. Now, in the soft morning light, the whole thing felt like a dream. Except my chest hurt too much for it to be anything but real. I'm sorry, I said automatically. I didn't mean to just show up like that. She frowned. Addison, you don't apologize for coming to your mother's house when your husband and his mother gang up on you at Christmas dinner. You don't have to go back there. Not today. Not ever, if you don't want to. Something in me relaxed a fraction at the certainty in her voice. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. You don't know what she said? Then tell me, she said. All of it, not just last night. I have a feeling this didn't come out of nowhere. I hesitated. For 5 years, I'd given my mom the sugar-coated version. Judith can be a lot, I'd say. But she means well. I didn't want her to worry. I didn't want to admit I'd chosen a life that hurt this much. But sitting there in my old living room, the dam finally broke. I told her about the first lunch, the comments about my body and cooking, about Judith rearranging my kitchen, criticizing my job, making constant digs about grandchildren, about the way every protest was met with, she's just joking, or don't be so sensitive, from Tyler. I told her about the work mixer, about the way he'd laughed when his mother joked that I'd forget my head if it wasn't attached, about how small that had made me feel. And last night, I finished, voice shaking again. She called me useless, said I was useless in the kitchen and useless for not giving them a grandchild, in front of everyone. And when I said it was hurtful, she doubled down. And I swallowed hard. He told me if I didn't like it, I could leave. My mother's jaw tightened. For a moment, she said nothing, her fingers whitening around her mug. Finally, she exhaled slowly. I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it, she said. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. That woman has been chipping away at you for years, and my idiot son-in-law has been handing her the chisel. A weak laugh escaped me, half sob. He's not your son-in-law anymore, technically. Not if She leaned forward. You don't have to decide everything today, but you do need help. Real help, a therapist, for one. You've been gaslit for so long you don't even trust your own reactions anymore. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. And, she added, you should talk to a lawyer. Just to know your options. Information isn't a commitment. It's power. The word lawyer made my stomach flip, but in a different way than it might have yesterday. Less like a threat, more like a tool. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, screen lighting up with Tyler's name. I stared at it for a beat, then picked it up. I'm safe at my mom's. I need space, I typed, then hit send before I could soften it. The reply came fast. You embarrassed me last night. You stormed out over a joke. A second bubble appeared before I could respond. It was just mom being mom. You took it the wrong way as usual. Anger rose, but it felt cleaner now, not like the shame-laced swirl I was used to. I'm not doing this by text, I muttered, more to myself than to him, and set the phone face down. Later that afternoon, I met my friend Kara at a coffee shop around the corner. She hugged me so hard the lid popped off my cup. I saw your text, she said, eyes wide. Are you okay? I told her the abridged version over Lats and a shared muffin. When I got to the part about, you know where the door is, her face darkened. I'm going to tell you something, and you might get mad at me, she said slowly. But I should have said it a long time ago. My stomach clenched. What? I've heard them, she said. Your mother-in-law and Tyler. At his family's 4th of July thing last year, I was in the kitchen getting ice, and Judith was talking about you. About your job, how boring it is. How you're too uptight to be fun. Tyler laughed. He said something like, well, at least she looks good in a blazer. Heat crawled up my neck, and, she continued, wincing, I've seen texts. From Chris's phone. He's in that group chat with Tyler and his sister. They call you the accountant robot. They make jokes about you checking the time whenever you're at their house. How you never relax. I told Chris it wasn't okay. He agreed, but... She trailed off, shame in her eyes. But no one told me. I finished for her, my voice hollow. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. I don't know what I thought. That maybe it wasn't my place. The betrayal was a physical thing. Heavy in my chest. It wasn't just Judith's barbs in the moment. It was a whole ecosystem of mockery I'd been walking into with a smile, thinking if I just tried harder, they'd accept me. They hadn't just tolerated me, they'd laughed at me. And the man I'd married had joined in. You weren't too sensitive, Kara said quietly. You were outnumbered. On the drive back to my mom's, the world outside my windshield looked the same. Dirty snow, bare trees, gray winter sky. Inside, something had shifted again. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't making things up. I had been standing in a room full of people who thought it was funny to undermine me. And I'd been calling that room family. That night, after a long shower and a longer cry, I sat at my mom's kitchen table with my laptop. I Googled therapists in my area who specialized in emotional abuse and intergenerational family issues. I sent 2 emails. Both replied within an hour with available appointments. Then I searched divorce attorney, family law, emotional abuse. The next morning, I found myself sitting in my car outside a sleek office building downtown, my breath fogging up the windshield. The sign on the door read, Carter and Associates, Family Law. My heart hammered in my chest. My hand shook on the door handle. I'd always thought divorce lawyers were for other people whose marriages, really, failed. As I pushed open that glass door with my heart hammering, I didn't know yet that the woman on the other side was about to give me my life back. The office was quieter than I expected. I don't know what I'd imagined. Phones ringing off the hook, hushed arguments in hallway corners, maybe. Instead, Carter and Associates felt like a dentist's waiting room. Neutral art on the walls, soft classical music, a receptionist with a reassuring smile. Addison, she asked when I walked in. My coat clutched too tightly in my hands. Beth Carter will be right with you. Beth, not Bethany. Early 40s, sharp black bob, navy suit. When she appeared in the doorway a moment later, she extended her hand with the calm confidence of someone who'd seen every version of my story and still treated this one like it mattered. Come on back, she said. Let's talk. Oh, her office was full of light. No diplomas plastered all over the walls, just a single framed quote behind her desk, knowledge is power. It felt less like a threat and more like an invitation. Start wherever you need to, she said, settling into her chair. Tell me what's going on. So I did. I told her about Judith. About the cooking comments, the real earner, jabs, the grandchildren digs. About the way she'd breezed into our apartment like she owned it, moving my things, appraising my body. About Christmas word for word, useless echoing in my ears as I spoke. Then I told her about Tyler. About every, that's just how she is. Every, don't be so sensitive. Every time he'd turned my pain into a personality flaw. About, you know where the door is. When my throat got tight, she pushed a box of tissues across the desk but didn't fill the silence. She just listened, pen moving occasionally but eyes never leaving my face. Do you have anything in writing? She asked when I finished. Texts, emails, social media messages. I pulled out my phone and the small folder I'd started at my mom's kitchen table. Screenshots of group texts. Messages from Tyler minimizing what had happened. A couple from Judith herself, short and cutting. She flipped through them, the corners of her mouth tightening at certain phrases. There's more, I said quietly. A friend told me she's seen texts in their family chat where they call me the accountant robot, make fun of my anxiety. I don't have copies, though. I just know. Baith nodded. That's often how it goes. The worst of it happens where you can't see it. I braced myself. So what does this mean? Legally, I mean. It means, she said, you are not crazy, and you are not overreacting. What you've described is a sustained pattern of emotional abuse in a husband who has consistently failed to support you. That is more than enough to justify a divorce, if that's what you want. The word landed differently this time. Less like a guillotine, more like a door. A's for the practical side. She continued, matter of fact, you've been married 5 years. You've contributed significantly to the household financially. You mentioned that many assets are in his name because his mother insisted on it. I nodded, cheeks burning. She said it was safer if things were in the bloodline. So, Beth said, our job will be to show the court that although assets are in his name, you contributed to acquiring and maintaining them. We'll argue for an equitable division, potentially some spousal support, depending on your respective incomes. The courts don't look kindly on a situation where one spouse is isolated financially and emotionally by a domineering in-law. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. There's something else, she added. From here on, you need to stop arguing with him. No more trying to convince him, no more long texts explaining how you feel. Don't justify, don't defend. Let me handle communication about the separation and divorce. But what if he reaches out, you save it, she said. You forward it to me. Start documenting any harassment or smear campaigns, dates, times, screenshots. Your job is to take care of yourself and collect information. That's it. It sounded so simple when she said it. It also felt like the opposite of everything I'd done for 5 years. We filed the initial paperwork a week later. The day he was served, my phone lit up like a pinball machine. First came the love bombing. We can fix this. You're my whole world. Don't throw away 5 years over one argument. Remember our honeymoon. We can get back to that. When I didn't respond, the tune changed. You're tearing this family apart. How could you do this to me after everything I've done for you? You're overreacting. It was just a jokey. Then, sharper, uglier. You'll regret this. No one will believe you. Everyone knows my mom is a saint. They'll think you're crazy. At the same time, my phone started buzzing with messages from numbers I recognized and some I didn't. Heard you left Tyler. He said you walked out over own comment at dinner. Wow. He says you're divorcing him because you hate his mom. Is that true? Beth's words echoed in my head, don't argue, don't defend. So, with my therapist's encouragement, I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop one night and started typing. Dear Han family names, I began, addressing Tyler's parents, his sister, and the aunt and uncle we'd seen most often. I wrote about Judith's comments, not just at Christmas, but over the years. I included specific phrases, specific occasions. I detailed how many times I'd tried to address it privately, how often I'd been told I was too sensitive. I described Christmas night exactly as it had happened, including the part where Tyler told me I could leave if I didn't like it. I didn't rant. I didn't name call. I didn't try to recruit anyone to my side. I ended with, I am leaving this marriage for my own mental health. I will be pursuing a legal divorce, and from this point on, I will not be discussing our relationship individually to avoid miscommunication and triangulation. This email is not an invitation to argue or debate. It is simply my account of what has led me here. I hit send with my heart pounding in my throat. The fallout came slowly, then all at once. Tyler's aunt replied first with a single line, I'm sorry to hear this. I hope you find peace. His sister wrote later that day, privately, I'm sorry. I saw how she treated you. I should have said something. I was scared of becoming her target. Others stayed silent, their read receipts little gray ghosts. And then Judith replied, How dare you accuse me of abuse? You are ungrateful. I welcomed you into this family. You are twisting things to make yourself look like a victim. You will never be part of this family again. She hit reply all. I stared at the screen. Then read it again, the all-caps words glaring back at me. Underneath, I watched as 3 little dots appeared from Tyler's uncle, then disappeared. As his sister sent me a separate, horrified, she really just wrote that to everyone. It hurt. Of course it did. Seeing her double down, seeing the lack of remorse in black and white, made the little girl in me, who still wanted to be accepted, flinch. But beneath the hurt was something else. a strange, quiet relief. For 5 years, it had been my word against theirs, my hurt against their jokes. Now, their own replies were doing the talking for me, and I wasn't the only one reading. The way the marriage ended on paper was a lot less dramatic than the way it had ended in my heart. Once the initial shock of the filed petition wore off, everything became a series of dates and documents. Separation agreement drafted, financial disclosures exchanged, mediation scheduled, then rescheduled when Tyler forgot to provide his pay stubs. Beth sat beside me at a long conference table during that first settlement meeting, a quiet wall of competence. Tyler sat across from us with his own attorney, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. He barely looked at me. My client is concerned. His lawyer began smoothing a stack of papers about Ms. Hayes' recent behavior, leaving the home abruptly on Christmas, sending inflammatory emails to the entire family. There are questions about her stability. I felt my stomach clench, but Beth didn't even blink. Inflammatory, she said mildly, sliding a folder across the table. You mean this email where she calmly describes specific instances of verbal abuse and makes no demands, and this, where your client's mother responds in all caps telling her she will never be part of this family again and accuses her of lying, those. The other lawyer's mouth tightened. Tyler shifted in his chair. A's for stability. Beth continued. Ms. Hayes has maintained full-time employment throughout the marriage, contributed significantly to the household finances, and has no history of mental health crisis. Meanwhile, your client has provided no evidence for his accusations beyond his own opinion. What we do have evidence of is a sustained pattern of belittling and a husband who told his wife to use the door if she didn't like how his mother spoke to her. Silence stretched for a beat. Tyler's lawyer cleared his throat. Let's talk numbers, he said. In the end, that's what it came down to, numbers. We listed assets, the joint savings account we'd built together, his 401 plan, my smaller retirement plan, the car I'd been making payments on, the apartment lease in both our names. Years of my life reduced to columns and percentages. Tyler tried to insist the bulk of the savings were, really, his because his name was on most of the accounts. Beth countered with pay stubs and bank records, showing how much of my salary had gone into them. When he balked at the idea of any spousal support, she pointed out the opportunities I'd turned down to accommodate his mother's expectations. The promotion I delayed because it wasn't the right time for more hours. The conferences I'd skipped to be available for holidays. In the end, the settlement wasn't some fairy tale where I walked away rich, and he walked away destitute. It was fair. I kept my car outright and a solid portion of the savings I'd helped build. He kept his full 401k. We closed the joint account. There was a small support payment agreed upon for a set period, so I wouldn't have to move back in with my mother while establishing my own place. The lease on the apartment was transferred into his name, along with full responsibility for the rent and utilities. When the judge approved the agreement and stamped the final decree, I felt more relief than anything else. No confetti, no standing ovation. Just a line drawn under a chapter of my life. While I was quietly rebuilding, Tyler's carefully curated image started to fray. I didn't hear it from him, of course. I heard it the way you hear most things in a smallish city, through the grapevine. A coworker mentioned over lunch one day that someone from Tyler's office had started at our firm. He came up in conversation, she said, lowering her voice. Apparently he talked a lot about his crazy ex-wife for a while. People felt bad for him at first. Then he started making jokes about his overbearing mother, and how no woman could ever be good enough for her precious boy. She picked at her salad. One of the HR reps overheard him making a comment about you being too emotional for corporate life. It didn't go over well. A few months later, Kara filled in the rest over drinks. Word is, his performance tanked, she said. Too many missed deadlines, too much gossip, not enough actual work. Combine that with the not-so-subtle misogyny and oversharing about his personal drama, and he's not there anymore. Fired, I asked. Mutually agreed separation. She air-quoted. which is corporate for please leave before we have to walk you out. He tried dating too. I knew that much from the occasional text Chris let slip, and then regretted, or a tagged photo that made its way to my feed before I tightened my privacy settings. It never seemed to stick. One woman bailed after Judith inserted herself into their third date, showing up uninvited at the restaurant because she'd heard they were there and wanted to say hello. Another posted on a local forum about a guy whose mom called 3 times during their first dinner and who referred to all his exes as too sensitive. Eventually, the stories shifted. He moved back in with his mom. Kara said one afternoon, half whispered like it was a secret, even though it was apparently common knowledge by then. He couldn't swing rent on his own after losing his job. They're them. In my mind's eye, I could see it Judith critiquing everything from how he stacked dishes to his choice of socks. Tyler back in his childhood bedroom with her voice bleeding through the walls. No wife to stand between them, no one else to absorb her barbs, or to blame when his life didn't look the way she thought it should. I didn't feel the rush of vindictive joy I might have imagined once. No fist pumping, no, serves him right, danced through my head. What I felt, mostly, was a weary sort of inevitability. This was always where that road led a man who never cut the cord, bound tighter and tighter to the person he'd chosen over everyone else, even when it destroyed every other relationship he had. A few months after the divorce was final, I went to a birthday party for a mutual friend. I almost didn't go, worried it would be awkward, that I'd spend the night fielding questions. Instead, it was normal. We ate pizza, played board games, argued about which movie to put on in the background. At one point, another friend I hadn't seen in a while pulled me aside, a paper plate in her hand. "I hope this isn't weird to say," she began, "but you seem so much lighter now, Addison. I never realized how tense you were at parties before, when you and Tyler came with his mom. You always looked like you were bracing for something." Across the room, a couple of people overheard and nodded. "Yeah," one said. "I saw little things, the way she talked to you. I didn't know how bad it was, but I'm glad you got out." For years I'd been the one tiptoeing around Judith's moods and Tyler's temper, shrinking myself to fit whatever version of me offended them least. Now, watching from a distance as he tried and failed to build a life under her roof, I realized something I hadn't expected, that my freedom mattered more to me than any version of revenge ever could. A year after that Christmas, my life was almost unrecognizable, and in the best possible way. My new apartment isn't big, but every inch of it feels like mine. There are plants on the windowsill that I picked out because I liked them, not because someone's mother said they were tasteful. Stacks of books line the shelves, mysteries, memoirs, cookbooks, spines creased in the places where I lost myself. A small desk sits by the window, where I sometimes work from home with a mug of tea instead of cold coffee gulped between Judith's demands. The walls are painted a soft, warm color I chose without asking anyone's opinion. There are no passive-aggressive post-its about how I load the dishwasher. No one rearranges my kitchen while I'm at work. The only voice I hear when I walk through the door is my own. A few months after the divorce was finalized, my boss called me into her office. "You've really stepped up this year," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "You've taken on more responsibility, handled clients beautifully. I'd like you to lead the new team starting in January. Senior accountant, team lead, a title I'd once turned down because it wasn't a good time for our family. This time, I said yes. At my next therapy session, I told my therapist about the promotion. She smiled, that small, proud smile she saves for moments when I finally see what she's seen for months. "You seem more grounded," she said. "When you talk about your life now, there's space for you in it, not just what everyone else wants from you." Later that night, brushing my teeth in my tiny bathroom, I caught my own reflection and did a double take. I looked like myself, less of the tightness around my mouth. Fewer worry lines etched between my brows. My eyes were still mine, but brighter. Somewhere along the way, I stopped scanning rooms for Judith's disapproval or rehearsing excuses for Tyler. Somewhere along the way, I started living my own life. I met Jonathan at a networking event I almost didn't go to. I was there to support a colleague presenting on a new tax regulation. He was there because his firm sponsored the panel. We ended up at the same high-top table during the coffee break, both reaching for the last blueberry muffin at the same time. "Please," he said, pulling his hand back with an easy grin. "I've already had 2. People might start talking." We talked numbers at first. What else do 2 finance people talk about? But then we talked about travel and music, and the weird comfort of well-organized spreadsheets. He asked about my work with genuine interest, not as a setup for a joke. Weeks later, on our 3rd date, sitting on my couch surrounded by takeout containers, I told him about Judith, about Tyler, about Christmas. He didn't say, "You should have," or "Why didn't you just?" He didn't try to fix it or excuse it, or suggest I'd misinterpreted things. "I'm so sorry you went through that," he said instead. "You didn't deserve any of it." Then he listened. Really listened. The contrast was jarring in small, ordinary moments. When I mentioned wanting a new couch, he didn't say, "My mom would hate that color." He said, "What do you want? What would make you happy in this space?" When we ordered food, he didn't roll his eyes at my weird choices. He asked, "What are you in the mood for tonight?" And meant it. When we started talking about taking a weekend trip together, he didn't call his mother to see if she approved. He pulled out his calendar and said, "What works for you?" I hadn't realized how radical those 4 words, "What do you want?" could feel until someone finally meant them. One afternoon, about a year to the day after I left Judith's house in tears, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's me. I've been thinking maybe we should meet up, get some closure, talk things through like adults." For a moment, old instincts twitched. Guilt, obligation, the urge to explain. Then they fizzled out as quickly as they'd come. There was no panic pounding in my ears. No desperate urge to be understood. Just a quiet certainty. I blocked the number without replying. Later that night, I opened an old folder on my external drive labeled "Wedding." Thumbnails of a day I no longer recognized filled the screen. Me in white, him in a suit, Judith's painted smile between us. I hovered over "Delete" for a long second. Then I thought about my living room now. The plants, the books, the laughter that echoed there. The way my chest didn't constrict when I unlocked my own front door. I clicked. The next Christmas, my apartment glowed with lights I'd strung badly, but proudly along the windows. The tiny tree in the corner was decorated with mismatched ornaments, some from my childhood, some I'd bought on clearance, just because they made me smile. My mom sat at the table, shuffling cards for a game we'd played when I was little. Jonathan stood at the stove, following my directions for stirring the sauce on the stove. "More salt?" he asked. I tasted it, nodded. Perfect. No one criticized my outfit. No one made snide comments about my job or my body. No one brought up grandchildren like a weapon. It was quiet. It was simple. It was peaceful. As we sat down to eat, I thought about the year before that last Christmas at Judith's. About the way I'd sat at her table, shrinking in my chair, begging silently for someone to stand up for me. No one had. So I did. He defended his mother over me so many times he thought I'd never actually go. What he didn't expect was to come home to an empty apartment and a wife who finally believed she deserved better. In the end, I didn't need him to choose me. I chose myself, and that made all the difference.